How you doing? I'm Michael Bell, the voice of Duke. And if you're listening to Anything Joe's, a collaborative journey to the world of G.I. Joe with Greg and Jaren, well, yo, Joe!
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Anything Joe's, a collaborative journey through the world of G.I. Joe. My name is Greg Engel,
And I'm Jaren Decker.
and we'll be your host today. If you're joining us after listening to some of our podcast episodes, welcome back. We're excited to open the YouTube channel for the first time and share the content that we've prepared with you. If this is your first time watching one of our videos, then welcome aboard and happy 4th of July. We're going to give you a brief introduction before we get into the content. I've been a lifelong G.I. Joe fan since I was just a kid. And recently, as the classified series figures were preparing to launch, Jaren reached out to me and we found we had a shared interest in it, but that Jaren didn't have a whole lot of knowledge about the G.I. Joe universe. Would you say that's accurate, Jaren?
Yeah, that's super accurate. Like I have been around it a little bit and I know, I know some of the characters but my knowledge is nothing. I mean, as everyone watching can see, I have a lot of Star Wars stuff, some Marvel stuff, but not a lot of G.I. Joe. There's not a lot, but the passion and the desire is there. So I'm excited to be on this journey and to learn.
And that was kind of the basis of when we started this channel, is that we wanted to make something that was accessible for collectors like me that have been around and read it and kind of seen it all, but also collectors like Jaren that are interested in learning more about the G.I. Joe universe, which might seem kind of daunting at this point after there was so much history. And that brings us to our first segment, which we call Recapped. Recapped is very simply just we're going to condense some stories in the G.I. Joe universe, and we're going to discuss them, and we'll cover kind of all the bases. The run that I picked to start with is the IDW Universe run, which is the G.I. Joe A Real American Hero comic that is currently running and written by Larry Hama. I felt like this was a good place to start because if you were interested in picking up the comics now, this will help you bridge that gap because you're not familiar with the characters or the storylines that are going on right now. I thought a lot about how we would cover them and in what way, and I decided that we would start with the actual relaunch, which starts with issue 155.5. And is also the contents of the first trade paperback, which they number volume 16 due to a bizarre numbering issue that they reset later on. It's kind of convoluted, but volume 16 is technically the continuation of the original Marvel run. Jared, before I get started, do you have any general questions about it? I know even that's kind of complicated.
First one, when did they stop the previous run?
So G.I. Joe, A Real American Hero 155 was in 1994.
Just to make everyone out there feel old, that was the year I was born.
And just to make people my age feel bad, I was almost out of high school. And I actually have I remember very vividly when this issue came out. I had collected the comics since the late 40s, right before Serpentor's origin happened. And issue 152 was the last issue that I bought regularly on my pull list.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and issues 153 and 154 are fill-in books that were done by another writer, a different art team, and are not very good. Honestly, they're not horrible, but they don't have the same standard that the rest of that run has. And I am excited to talk about that run with you at some point because those are some of the best stories in the entire G.I. Joe universe, period. But I skipped those two issues because they weren't very appealing. And then I remember I was in a Kmart in my local mall which sold comics, and they had a 155 on the shelf. and it said, "This is it, the final issue." And I remember thinking, "Oh no, this is my fault. I'm the reason they canceled this book." And I picked up that I bought it because I wanted to read it. It's a great issue. We'll get into that at some point.
So you were one of the few people still reading, and once you stopped at 152, they were like, "Well, if we can't keep Greg interested, we don't deserve a series." And you killed it.
They were like, "We need 100,000 purchases." Oh, it's 99,999. So yes, and issue 155 is a great send off. We have to cover some stuff from the Marvel universe because 155 and a half and forward picks up and draws a lot on that mythology. But in the interest of not stepping on those stories, we'll really only kind of cover the need to know. I wanted people that have never read a G.I. Joe comic to be able to understand what's going on. I also wanted people that maybe have only read the Marvel run to be able to carry forward, and if they want to start reading the new stuff. Or if maybe you just haven't read this run in a long time, this is a good like refresher course to kind of remind you of the stuff that's been happening since the book came back. So with that in mind, I think we're ready to start.
We are. I'm ready to get into it.
The issues that are covered in this trade paperback are 155 and a half to 165, and those are broken into two pretty distinguishable story arcs. So we'll take a break in between those story arcs and discuss what we feel about the book itself. This book relaunched in 2010, which I was really surprised about because it doesn't seem like it's been going for 10 years already. That's a lot of content.
That is, and that's a lot of stuff I've got to catch up on. So I got to get busy.
I'm going to read the title page here in the first page of the trade paperback. It says the mission so far. G.I. Joe has been disbanded, and Cobra has wasted no time. Cobra Commander, after helping provoke civil unrest in the United States, has begun unfolding his sinister plan, activating sleeper agents all over Washington, D.C. Meanwhile, Dr. Mindbender has discovered a Trojan horse planted in the brainwave scanner by none other than Dr. Venom. With Cobra Commander's son, Billy, being reprogrammed on the machine, Mindbender must scramble to figure out what trickery Venom has left behind. I wouldn't quite call that a previously on in so much as a getting ready to come up part, but it does touch on some stuff that we want to cover. There are some characters here that are not well known in the G.I. Joe mythology if you haven't read the original book.
I had no idea who most of the people mentioned in that kind of intro was. I was like, oh man, I'm in.
We'll definitely have to take a second and talk about Dr. Venom and Billy because those are two characters that pretty much only exist in the comic book. So, issue 155 and a half came out for Free Comic Book Day in, I guess, 2010, and was supposed to be kind of this, like most Free Comic Book Day books, a jumping on point. It was supposed to entice the reader to put the book on their pull list, and it's kind of a mini story. Most Free Comic Book Days are probably less than 10 pages, and this is no example, this is no difference. And there's not a ton of content in this book that's particularly worth talking about. They really just kind of want to set the stage and remind you what's going on. It starts out with Cobra Commander having like a dream about taking over the U.S., and then Zartan comes in and is telling him that the first plan of their operation is starting to succeed. And so the linchpin of this story, this plan is they've funded a army called the Broken Star Liberation Army, and they've secretly utilized this army to kind of throw the U.S. in upheaval. So they're like attacking the Senate building. They try to take over the Statue of Liberty. They plant a flag on Mount Rushmore. Kind of a bunch of ridiculous things. And then the U.S. military rolls in and is immediately like, nah, squash. But that was what they wanted to do because it opens up this door where Cobra can go to the government and under a slightly different facade, they're like, well, you guys obviously need to beef up your security. Cobra security forces can do that for you. We'll be a government contracted military force. So he places a call to a group of military generals called the Jugglers. So let's take a second and talk about the Jugglers.
That was one of my questions. Was why are they called the Jugglers?
The Jugglers are a group of characters from the original Marvel run that are not corrupt, but pretty shady. And historically, every time that they come, they butt heads with G.I. Joe a lot because they're kind of crooked. They're bought and sold, and they don't really do what's best for the country. They just kind of do what's best for them. And so when Cobra Commander places a call to them and approaches them, he is like, "This is what we're going to do. We need you. You know, you guys are. We're going to try to pass martial law." And Cobra Commander says, "That sounds great. We're going to back you up on that. I'll place a call." And so what he actually does is he activates a bunch of sleeper cells in the government in Washington D.C. It's a bunch of Crimson Guardsmen that have infiltrated the Senate or whatever, and they can place votes for them. And that's exactly what they do. He places all these calls. He wakes all these people up. He starts calling people in. And one of the things he starts doing is he starts calling back operatives that he has out on the field. And amongst those operatives is Baroness, Storm Shadow, and Billy. So when we last left the G.I. Joe run in issue 155, there had been several Cobra operatives that had been victim of the brainwave scanner. The brainwave scanner is something that has evolved a little bit over the years. It originally started out as a creation by Dr. Venom, who we'll get to in a minute, to read the thoughts of captured victims, and was originally used on Snake Eyes in an attempt to ascertain the location of the G.I. Joe headquarters, which is called the Pit.
Did it work?
It didn't. Snake Eyes has got advanced ninja training. Actually, it's really cool. He uses trauma from his past to block the way that the machine is working, and is the first. This is really early on. I should also mention that this is G.I. Joe number 10, so extremely early on in the run, and is the first time that we get a glimpse into the past of Snake Eyes at that time. When we see some memories of him like training, and there's a tragedy with his sister that is also kind of touched on in one of these runs as well. So the brainwave scanner started to evolve from that. It was utilized later on also with the birth of Serpentor, where they use it to kind of implant the DNA into the simulacrum, and at some point it gets even more advanced, and they can start to brainwash people with it. There's a story where Clutch and Rock and Roll are captured, and they brainwash them, and to put them in like as secret agents in the pit to report back. And by the end of the run, they had started to use it on their own operatives because the Cobra hierarchy was starting to kind of fall apart. Cobra Command is also always kind of in this state of turmoil. So what we're seeing here is the Baroness, Storm Shadow, and Billy are all still where we left them in 1994. They've been brainwashed, and they're still working for Cobra.
So these guys, they're kind of ambiguous on what side they are? Like they can float to each side during the series, or are they normally good, or are they normally bad, or
We're talking about Baroness and Storm Shadow.
Baroness, Storm Shadow, and Billy? Yeah.
Yeah, so Destro and Baroness at some point kind of split off on their own. Destro specifically has always been a weapons manufacturer. Destro makes weapons and sells them to Cobra Commander. So it benefits him to help Cobra Commander because he's like his number one client, something like that. But eventually they reach a point where they've been backstabbed and they're just kind of sick of it. So they split off, and he basically has his own little militia, which they call the Iron Grenadiers. But at this point, they're friends again because it's just cooler that way. I was under the impression that Destro had also been brainwashed. It does seem very unusual that he would allow the Baroness to be a victim of the brainwave scanner, and he would be impartial because they're romantically linked. But apparently it's okay. He has some concerns that you see in this issue, but it doesn't seem to be touched on. And then Storm Shadow has become a good guy for a very long period of time until it gets brainwashed and is back on the side of Cobra. Storm Shadow starts off as a Cobra agent. He is working for Cobra Commander specifically to learn who assassinated his mentor, and that's it. So he's actually a pretty That's not how he's. I know that's not how he's portrayed in the cartoon or in other sources, but in this one, that he's just kind of using it to get this information. And once that information comes out in the story, it starts this transformation series where he becomes a good guy, gets a costume redesign. It teams up with with Snake Eyes a lot, and he's a valuable member of the team. He's a real cool good guy. And then all those guys get captured. They all get brainwashed. Billy is the same way. This is as good a time to talk about Billy as any, since he's here. Billy's first appearance is also in issue number 10, except he's just a kid at this time, and we don't know anything about him. The Cliff Notes version of Billy's origin is he is being held captive in a Cobra-fronted city that looks really nice. It's a peaceful little town called Springfield. And the other Joes get captured, and they share a cell with him. And he gives them some information that helps them escape. And that's all we kind of see of him, and for about 30 or so issues. He comes back into play when the Baroness and Major Blood are trying to plot an assassination attempt on Cobra Commander. And Billy is in the Cobra Youth Guard, which is basically the Boy Scouts of Cobra. And so they have implemented this plan where Billy will approach the commander, recite a poem, pull a gun, and assassinate him.
Oh my God!
As this, Billy is a little bit older at this point, also. He's still relatively young.
That's better than a 9-year-old doing it.
Borderline young man. So the assassination attempt begins, and it looks like it's going to be successful. Storm Shadow is still Cobra Commander's bodyguard at this point. And he sees what's happening. Storm Shadow's a trained ninja. He's like, nope. He pulls out his sword. Destro runs out and stops the whole thing. Destro's like, you can't kill this guy because it's Cobra Commander's son. That's the first time we find out that Billy is Cobra Commander's son. And there's a lot of stuff that happens with Billy over the run that isn't integral to what we're talking about today. But basically, Billy is locked away. They have a trial. Cobra Commander, stone cold, is like, that's not my kid. Lock him up. Or execute him. And this is actually ties in very well, actually, because it's at this point that Storm Shadow decides he doesn't want to be a part of it anymore. He helps Billy escape, and he starts to train him in the Arashikage way. So Billy, which is why if you look back on this page, Billy is wearing basically a Storm Shadow look-alike costume, because that's his master. They train together, and he's a pretty stand-up ninja overall. Until he gets captured, brainwashed. So
I feel like this is a kind of a common theme.
Man, if you think the brainwave scanner was used a lot then, wait do you see he really likes it. Brainwave scanner doesn't have a toy. It's a comic book exclusive plot device, and was used fairly often. When I was younger, it was really cool. The older I get and the more I see it, the more I'm like, this seems like just something to fall back on. And that's not a critique. I still think the brainwave scanner is cool. And I guess it does get kind of hard to reunite all the enemies when they keep trying to kill each other.
Yeah.
So, okay.
It's a good plot device.
That's some good groundwork. Cobra Commander's got a new suit of armor that he's testing out in the field. It's designed by Dr. Mindbender. And he goes out into the sky. He fights a bunch of stuff, some drones to try it on. Honestly, for the purpose of this story, this armor is not it's not very important. There's some combat that comes up later on where he's wearing it, and that's it. Cobra Commander's not a fighter, and he never has been. He has had a suit of armor like this around issue 150 of the Marvel run, so it's nothing new. It just kind of levels the playing field so he can fight with the big boys, basically.
It looks cool, though. I mean, really, that's all I think he cares about.
It does look cool, and so Billy and Storm Shadow and Baroness return from their mission that's called off, and they're pretty hostile about it. But using his new suit of armor, Cobra Commander just kind of shuts them down and puts them for another session in the brainwave scanner. So, and then that's kind of the first time you get to see it since the relaunch, where he's putting everybody through the rounds. It's just like a refresher course to kind of pad down all of that normalized thinking where they're fighting back against it. Especially Storm Shadow, who's a trained ninja, they have this like mindset where they're more mentally strengthened against that, or they have better defenses against that sort of stuff. So we see Billy getting zapped again, and There's also a short discussion where Baroness questions where Destro's loyalty lies, because the Baroness, although brainwashed, is still cohesive enough to understand that that's going to be her at some point. They'll put her through a refresher course, and she questions why Destro would allow that to happen. There's really no clarification on why Destro would allow that to happen, but I guess in all fairness, there's a pretty indistinct set of time that has passed that is not clarified on and hasn't been to this point. So maybe there's some history there that hasn't been told in the story form that we don't know about. This is also the first time where Dr. Mindbender broaches the subject that Dr. Venom has left some kind of underlying programming in the brainwave scanner that he can't really seem to suss out, almost like a virus. And so this is a good spot to talk about Dr. Venom a little bit. Dr. Venom is also a Marvel Comics exclusive. You'll find that, especially the farther back you go, Larry had to create a lot of characters to fill out the roster, and this is a lot of what we see in these early days is characters that he just, there was only like less than a dozen Cobras in the first couple of years, so it only made sense that he would make characters, and then I guess he liked them enough that he started bringing them back more and more and more. Dr. Venom basically is the previous Dr. Mindbender. Before Dr. Mindbender, you had Dr. Venom. However, Dr. Mindbender is a lot more eccentric than Dr. Venom. Dr. Venom is just kind of he just wears a lab coat. He's just a regular dude. But it was a good entryway for people, for more scientific inventions, to have somebody that could do that. So he technically invented the brainwave scanner. He also operated out of Springfield in the basement of an arcade. He was in the same facility that Billy was a prisoner in, and was in charge of a lot of brainwashing. There's a big story arc where him and Snake Eyes and a third mercenary called Quinn are all tethered together, where they're trying to escape because they're trapped outside the country, and they've not been abandoned, but basically they're kind of on their own. And it's a really great story arc. Unfortunately, Dr. Venom doesn't really last very long. He is killed in a pretty big battle around the late teens, issue 19, somewhere in there. And that's the last we heard of him for the rest of the Marvel run. He basically is only mentioned in passing. So he's been dead for a long time. And while that doesn't mean a lot in comic books, it pretty much held true. We didn't see him again. And even in this instant, he's not technically returned. He's just found a clever way to bring him back into the story. So Storm Shadow is starting to kind of wake up a little bit. He's been eavesdropping on conversations. He's starting to understand what's going on. At the same time, people are starting to notice that Dr. Venom's gigantic face is up on the monitors, while Dr. Mindbender is trying to hide that.
A little bit conspicuous.
Yeah, and so the end of this particular issue is when Cobra Commander places all the calls to his sleeper cell agents and starts bringing all of his Crimson Guardsmen out of hiding to put him in the Senate to place the vote, so he can have control over his secondary military force. Basically, Cobra is working as an independent contractor, but as we'll soon see, they have a lot more power than the government expected them to. So we start with all the Joes are kind of driving around or doing their own thing. They're all off on different things. Duke is in the city for whatever reason. Stalker is still in the military doing special ops in the desert. Mainframe is doing technical work for the government on a satellite dish. And they're all aware that Cobra is basically has taken over, because you see them doing things like helping kids across the street, and they have the face of someone that's serving the public.
Mm-hmm.
So we also see Hawk is trying to suss out what's going on, because they all know that something's up. They just don't really have any power to do anything because they're not in any official military capacity. And that escalates because there's suddenly a kill order placed on all remaining G.I. Joes. They focus specifically on the characters that we'll see in this story, which is Duke and Hawk, Scarlet and Snake Eyes, Roadblock, Mainframe, Stalker, maybe somebody I'm missing, but that's the bulk of them. So there's a bunch of different story arcs where they're attacked on the street, or Stalker is approached by Cobra Vipers while he's trying to do a sniping. He's trying to snipe a target, and they start to come in contact with each other. Duke and Hawk get in contact first, and they have like a secret meetup point when stuff like this starts to happen, and they're trying to warn all the other Joes that, hey, they're coming to get us. We've got to warn everybody else. So there's a series of little stories where whatever these individual Joes are doing, they come in contact with Vipers, and they pretty much are, they're able to get out of it okay. And then they say, well, okay, we'll meet up at this secret meeting spot, with the exception of Duke, who goes to check on Snake Eyes and Scarlet. And of course, if were ever two people that don't need backup, it's the two of them.
Yeah.
But they're the first three that kind of come together as they're reassembling this strike team.
It's kind of cool to see, and although I don't have the connection to the past of the characters, it's kind of cool knowing that, okay, like, they're coming together, and it's not the origin, but it's like a new origin, so like I don't feel like I've missed out that much.
Yeah, I think if these are very commonly used characters, so at least from the G.I. Joe perspective, you're right. It's a pretty good place to start reading. It is interesting that he chose to put so much stuff from the previous book into it, but maybe they was just banking on that when he made it. Like, he didn't expect a whole lot of new fans, or he thought that people that read it would be able to pick it up as they go, which you probably can. But I feel like it's helpful to have information like this just in case.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'm glad I have you because like I said, there's a lot of stuff that coming into it. I was like, okay, wait, hold on. Like, I know Snake Eyes, but who the heck is Billy? And
So we skip ahead a little bit as the G.I. Joe team is starting to come together in the face of that adversity and being on a kill list. On the Cobra side of things, we're starting to see the Dr. Venom virus, for lack of a better word, sort of manifest itself a little bit more, and the things that Dr. Venom on the computer are saying are being mimicked by Billy vocally. Billy and Baroness are sparring together, and Destro and Dr. Mindbender are observing, and they both notice that the Dr. Venom virus is maybe a little bit more serious than they thought. So the only other interesting thing to take note of in this particular part of the story is that for whatever reason, Baroness and Billy have a little bit of a love interest. It's more unusual because it doesn't really come into play in any other way. That I guess the idea is that as Dr. Venom is slowly integrating into Billy's actual mind, he's becoming more manipulative and more evil, and that is more appealing to Baroness. There's even a spot where Destro observes this happening.
yeah, I was wondering about that. Like, is this the only time we see them as a thing?
Yeah, it's not only has it never been referenced previously, Dr. Venom didn't have any love interest like that. Dr. Venom was not well regarded in Cobra Command because he was such a backstabber. Even in this, from Beyond the Grave, he's kind of a backstabber.
Yeah.
So
he kind of ruins it for him.
so it is an unusual take, and I don't specifically understand the purpose of it, but it is what it is. Anyway, so at this point, the G.I. Joe team has basically been formed. Everybody that was on the kill squad has been reassembled, and they have a mission, which we're not privy to at this point. But we know that they've been dispatched to where the Cobra operatives are right now, which, if I'm not mistaken, is the Silent Castle. Silent Castle is like a famous background from G.I. Joe comics. It's probably most well known for being the stage of G.I. Joe number 21, the Silent issue, which is probably the single most well known G.I. Joe comic, other than the very first issue, I would think. Silent Castle is just a castle that Destro owns, and they plot their missions from there. And so what we see is using the sewage system or the underground tunnels. Scarlet and Snake Eyes have been tasked with infiltrating it, and that's exactly what they do. They have contact with some eels, and they break into the underground. They like come out through the sewage grate, and they immediately they immediately are busted by Storm Shadow. So while they're having a fight with Storm Shadow, the other Joes have set out as a kind of a recon team, and they're just outside the gate, waiting to be they're called in case they're needed for backup. Snake Eyes gets hurt pretty severely in his fight with Storm Shadow. They manage to incapacitate Storm Shadow, but gets stabbed in the leg. So he's kind of not out of commission because this is Snake Eyes, but Scarlet basically has to pick him up and is moving him on her own. Hawk has infiltrated the Pentagon. He is immediately detected, and they know that he's on a kill list because Cobra operatives are everywhere. And they pursue him through the Pentagon. He manages to hide in this janitor's closet, which turns out to not be a janitor's closet at all. It's like this reinforced steel, super secret room. And Hawk gets on the phone and calls the president, maybe, I think, and is basically like, hey, you should know what Cobra's up to, and I can provide proof for you, in X amount of time.
It's like 5 minutes or something.
Short. While the guards are trying to bust through the door, he's on the phone with them explaining the situation. So we now have the idea that the G.I. Joe team's mission has something to do with what's going on in the Silent Castle. There's a lot of combat at this point. Duke the recon team is busted up. They're ratted out by some local tourists or villagers. And it kind of turns into a free-for-all where Rock and Roll and Roadblock and Duke Stalker are all fighting. They release bats out into the castle, and they're fighting back against them. So all the Joes are kind of in the castle at different parts doing different things. This is around the time that Hawk gets through, and the call and is like, hey, they bust through and they're getting ready to arrest him or shoot him, and he hands the phone, and he's basically like, you're going to want to talk to who's on the other end of this line. And so there's a huge shootout. There's two big fights going on at the same time. We got Snake Eyes and Scarlet, and they're fighting the Cobra Commander and Baroness, and then Zartan and Mindbender and Destro and the Bats are facing down with Duke and Roadblock and all.
And can I just say real quick, I love the design of the Bats. I think they're just so cool.
The Bats are really, really cool. It's very interesting that the Bats were created not specifically for this purpose, but they were a great loophole in the cartoon where they could be like, well, we can shoot the crap out of these. They're just robots. You know what I mean?
Just robots.
We can blow them
fine.
up. And that's kind of brilliant. I've always enjoyed the Bats. The original Bats had like that hologram on their chest, which I always thought was super cool. So I'm not going to break down a whole bunch of fighting. I'll showcase as much of it as I can, but there's nothing critical to the overall plot of the story other than a bunch of people are fighting, and at the same time, Duke and Mainframe are trying to hack into the I don't want to say mainframe again, the database of the Silent Castle, while they're holding all these bats off, and everybody's kind of having the showdown. At the culmination of this firefight, there's a couple of things that happen that are important. The first thing is that Snake Eyes gets hit in the head by a projectile and knocks him unconscious. And at this point, he's kind of taken captive. They basically have him on their side. Scarlet is being overwhelmed by the bats, and simultaneously, Storm Shadow has kind of fully come out of his brainwashing, which is beneficial because he's instrumental in helping Scarlet escape the Silent Castle before they're overwhelmed. At the almost exact same time, on the other end of the castle, Mainframe has downloaded the data that he needs. He's uploaded it to the whoever, the Pentagon, the president, somebody.
He's uploaded it to people,
and it has
all that matters.
All the critical information that they need. So Cobra's defense contract has been canceled. The NSA is reading all the documentation that they've downloaded. Storm Shadow and Scarlet have escaped the Silent Castle together, and Snake Eyes has been captive and is presumably on his way to the brainwave scanner. And that recaps the first basic story arc of the trade paperback. Where that's about the first half of it.
Let me just say that Cobra needs to work on file names a little bit better. Like the one is long-term strategy and order of battle for operations in the continental United States. I feel like evil plan number 1 if that's all if you're gonna just blatantly say that. If you're not gonna try to hide it, just be like, this, we are bad, look in here.
That's a good point. You have to wonder how much data they had to download to find specifically what they needed. So with that in mind, we'll go ahead and dive into the other half of the trade paperback. The other half of the trade paperback is specifically focused on the transformation that Billy is undergoing, as well as kind of resolving the events from the first half. It opens up with Snake Eyes is in the brainwave scanner immediately after the battle that they just had, and Billy has almost taken a complete conversion into the Dr. Venom mentality. If you hadn't put it together yet, you certainly should have by now. And maybe that's what that romance is supposed to be. Maybe that was just supposed to be a foreshadowing for people to see that Billy was changing fundamentally.
Yeah.
But
you can see in the one panel, there's the one with the one crazy eye. That's when it's like, okay, yeah, something's changed. He looks crazy.
Yeah, so we get our first look at the first new look at the internal workings of the brainwave scanner. The brainwave scanner always has this kind of meta picture image where everything is happening in a cyber universe and their avatars are doing all the work. So they're going in there and they're smashing down all of Snake Eyes' internal memories. It's hard to kind of explain. It's hard to kind of understand, but I guess it's supposed to be a visual way to understand what's happening in his mind internally. So in that sense, I guess it makes sense. And so while that's happening, we see the aftermath of everything else. Storm Shadow and Scarlet are still together. They've borrowed a truck as transportation. The rest of the Joes are kind of on their own to get out, and they're in disguise as regular civilians, and they're posing as a basketball team or something, so they can get back to the airport. Back on the state side, the only Joe that basically didn't go is Hawk, and Hawk is cleaning up all of the sleeper agents, finding all the Crimson Guardsmen that had been activated and arresting them and putting them down. This is also the part where Zartan approaches and Storm Shadow's immediately like, chop! I feel bad because Zartan has undergone a lot of not transformations, but his origin has changed a lot over the years. There was a phase where he was supposed to be a pretty well trained martial artist, because he had practiced under infiltration and at the Arashikage dojo with everybody else, so he was supposed to have some skills, and sometimes he does and sometimes he does not.
Sometimes he just gets punched in the face, and that's it.
So basically everybody is able to come together at the airport. The Joes have got to their I guess that's a C-130 probably, while Bill picks them up. Storm Shadow and Scarlet are there, and Scarlet is explaining, hey, Storm Shadow is starting to wake up. He helped save me. We need him to get Snake Eyes back, so we're bringing him with us. So they're like, we agree, but we've got to take some precautions.
Now that piece of artwork, sorry, for those of you who have seen it, I love that art. Like, I want to get that printed, like the Snake Eyes with the Cobra insignia, and then Storm Shadow with the USA behind him. I just think that's so cool with like the split.
Yeah, so that's the regular cover for issue 160. And also at the end of this video, we'll have kind of like I don't know what you would call it, but I'll have a cover gallery where we can look at all the artwork that was used in all the covers of these issues, because I find that stuff pretty interesting. Not to go off on too big of a tangent, but I used the opening cover for this trade paperback at the beginning. The guy that does these trade paperback covers, I think, does a really great job. I think that artwork is extremely good. So we're reached a point now where basically G.I. Joe's back in operation. Call in all the little doggies, and so we start to see the team has started to expand now. And right away we see Clutch and Lady J and Gung Ho have all been called into active action. They're working on intel from Storm Shadow about a captured G.I. Joe operative, which just happens to be Chuckles, Chuckles is their undercover guy. Somebody that went from hardly ever being used to being used a whole lot. Christos Gage wrote a great Chuckles themed G.I. Joe limited edition story prior to this for IDW that is one of the best reworkings of a character I've ever read. So
I'm a fan of Chuckles. I just got to say that. Like I like Chuckles.
Chuckles is the kind of character that you look at and go, "This character looks so ridiculous. He has an Hawaiian shirt." But people that are talented writers like Christos Gage, like Larry Hama, they take him and they make him pretty cool. Chuckles is pretty cool in this run.
Yeah.
Looks absolutely nothing like what he looked like originally. He used to look a lot different. Chuckles' first appearance in the Marvel run is one of only 2 issues that Todd McFarlane drew for the G.I. Joe comic. In the second issue, the art didn't get published because Larry thought it was horrible and he rejected it.
Oh wow.
Yeah. Of course, this was early on in Todd's career, but still, it's still Todd McFarlane. They republished it later, but that particular issue 61, basically has 2 different pieces of art for it. It's pretty odd.
Man, the stuff you learn, right? That's
I'm saying.
crazy.
So the Joes find that Storm Shadow's intel is accurate. Chuckles is being questioned. They get into a firefight with some guards outside, and they're able to free him, which is useful to this part of the story because Chuckles has been tasked with interrogating Storm Shadow, who they're keeping as a prisoner in the pit. This is also the first chance for people that haven't read the original run to kind of see what the G.I. Joe headquarters has looked like for the better half of its run. It always has these 3 tents. They're based in Utah usually, but it's all a facade to a huge underground bunker where they have a space shuttle under there, like it's monstrous. So basically, the base is back into operation, just like nothing had ever changed. You see Outback, their spirit. I mean, it's just like they basically called everybody back in, which is kind of an unusual step for something that they mothballed. That they suddenly are ready to roll out all of the money, but so Chuckles goes in to interrogate Storm Shadow, and big surprise, he's not there. This is not the first time. Also, not the first time that Storm Shadow has escaped from imprisonment at G.I. Joe headquarters. Although the last time that it happened, he actually was still a Cobra operative. So they find him. He's just kind of hanging around eating lunch, and he says, "Hey, I could have turned on a self detonation if I'd wanted to, but I didn't because I just wanted you guys to see I'm here of my own free will." So simultaneously, while this is happening, the Cobra is picked up on what is actually pretty clever. The C-130 that the Joes were brought in on land, and they have a blocker that scrambles all the satellite dishes. So they scramble all the satellite imagery, and then they open up a huge ramp. The C-130 goes in it, and the ramp closes, and then the satellites come back on. Cobra picks up on the unusualness of this, looks at that imagery and zooms in and goes, "Those are C-130 treads in the dirt. This is where their base is," which they have had encounters here before where they tricked them. They showed up and they moved those big tents away. So they go there and they're like, "There's nothing here." Like, pretty silly, but effective. So they're like, "Now we have Snake Eyes. We're gonna launch a assault on the base. We're gonna throw a bunch of bats at them, bring in some heavy bombs, and go get them."
Yeah, they definitely like actually were practical in that effect. Like they were like, "Oh, hey, let's just look and see what had happened, see if we can pick up on anything." So that was really cool. Also, a little bit earlier, there was a Scarlet and Chuckles moment there. Is there some backstory there that I'm missing?
The crux of that story basically is that there's not really a backstory there. Scarlet is just really high strung because they have Snake Eyes, and so she confronts Chuckles and is basically like, "You have to get to the bottom of this because we have to get him back." And Chuckles is like, "I know, I'm just doing my job." So we talked about Springfield a little bit earlier. There's another very popular North American based hideout for Cobra, and that's Braca Beach, which is on the Jersey Shore. This is basically where Cobra controls the whole city, and nobody knows it, and they have hidden operatives everywhere, and they have all their hardware there. So they've taken their newly brainwashed operative Snake Eyes, and they're planning their attack from here. They brought the brainwave scanner with them, and Billy is. I mean, I feel like at this point anybody that was talking. Well, actually, there's a scene where Destro is basically like. Billy says, "Just who do you think you are?" And Destro's like, "I know who I am. Do you know who you are?" Like most of them are putting it together that there's something really, really wrong about it. So they are hanging out in Braca Beach, and Torpedo and Lady J are in disguise as surfers, and they observe Cobra Commander Baroness and Destro on a boardwalk having a bit of an argument. The argument is based around the fact that Zartan has come back to the Dreadnoks. He says, "Hey, we got to go do some work. Go ahead and get your stuff ready." And the Dreadnoks are like, "We're not doing anything till we have been fed." And so Cobra Commander tells Baroness that she has to go get grape soda and donuts for the Dreadnoks. So she's pretty mad about it, as she understandably is. And
Should be. Should be. That's not fun.
so she goes and gets her grape soda. She gets her chocolate-covered donuts. Lady J and Torpedo are observing the vamp. The Baroness is immediately clued in on this. She sees them, and they have a bit of a encounter with their vehicles. She rams them. They flip the vamp over. There's Lady J and Baroness have pretty much a knockdown, drag-out fight where they both get in a lot of blows. Actually, it's nice to see that it's not a one-sided fight. But ultimately, Lady J delivers the final KO, and that's it. Now they take her as a prisoner. So now Cobra has Snake Eyes, but G.I. Joe has the Baroness.
So they've captured each other's queens, or well, more like bishops maybe.
I mean, both two MVPs
Yeah.
of their respective organizations. Okay, so Storm Shadow has escaped yet again, and he is confronted by Scarlet and Spirit, and Storm Shadow says, "Hey, I don't want to wait around anymore. I got to go find my sword brother, Snake Eyes. So you can stop me, or you can try to stop me." And they're like, "No, we're with you. We trust you. We want to help you." So Storm Shadow is on his way. He leaves the headquarters. He's off to save Snake Eyes. That's his only purpose. He's not involved in any of the other stuff. Simultaneously, speaking of Snake Eyes has discreetly infiltrated where the brainwave scanner's at, and willingly puts himself in it. And there's a long sequence where you see Snake Eyes kind of walking through the heartache of his memories, where he sees his sister gets killed in a car wreck. He sees some of the stuff that he had to endure when he was in Vietnam. And there's again, this is all happening in his mind.
Mm-hmm.
But he also has a showdown with Dr. Venom, who's like driving the car that killed his sister. Not really. Again, it's very Inception, Matrix-y.
Yeah.
But at the culmination of this scene, he scares Dr. Venom off, and he finds a set of keys, which he'll need later, or which he's going to use later on as part of Snake Eyes' secret, cool ninja plan.
Yeah.
So, in the same sense that Storm Shadow is not really interested in the military aspect of what G.I. Joe and Cobra are doing, that ultimately is kind of where Destro is veered off to at this point. Destro is only concerned with retrieving the Baroness, which is something that has happened in previous times. He's not really concerned in he doesn't want to get involved in the conflict. He just wants to get the Baroness back. Cobra Commander, not so concerned about that. He's got a single-minded approach on attacking the base. Well, as it just so happens, Destro is smart enough to go to the scene where Baroness and Lady J fought. He can analyze it, and he's like, well, we pretty much know where the Joe's base is. We've always thought it's here. We already know Cobra's headed there, so he enlists the help of Zartan and the Dreadnoks. He says, I'm gonna have you guys come with me to help me accomplish my goal. So all of these things are kind of coming together at the culmination of this as Snake Eyes uses the key mentally to unlock the door to the brainwave scanner. Billy is observing this physically. It's getting a little layered.
Yeah.
Billy is observing this happening.
I'm not gonna lie, it did take me like 3 times of rereading this. Like, okay, what is going on here? You know, like, okay, let's see what's.
You have to figure out a way to show, I guess, what's happening in their mind, and so I get it. It is complicated, but basically, even though Billy is observing this, he's unleashed his avatar, Dr. Venom, to fight Snake Eyes inside the brainwave scanner to over control of his own mind. Meanwhile, the Baroness, also attempting escape, has snuck out a small piece from her Cobra insignia, and that allows her a signal to get out from the outside of the base, which is like heavily shielded. So Cobra drops in all these bat troopers. They've got rattlers overhead. They start attacking, and guess what? There's nothing there. They pulled the old move the tent trick again. This, however, has not fooled the other people that are there to attack the Joe base, which is Destro and the Dreadnoks. Destro is smart enough to know where the GPS readings are supposed to be, so they start digging into the ground and they find an access tunnel. Destro is using his he's got like a little glider that came as a vehicle in one of his later figures, which you don't see a lot, but is actually a pretty cool little vehicle.
That does look like a cool little thing.
Yeah, so they use it as a smoke screen to infiltrate the base, and it is pretty effective. He basically flies right in and has a small conflict and grabs the Baroness, and they're on their way out as the Joes are in pursuit. At the same time, this is the part where Storm Shadow has reached basically where he's going. Storm Shadow has a hideaway that is a hollowed out water tower. And Snake Eyes obviously knows this, so he has led Billy or Dr. Venom to this base for a final fight. Storm Shadow already knew this and has anticipated the next step, throws his sword, and it hits the rotor blade of the helicopter that they're in, immediately bringing it down. So Brainwash, Snake Eyes, and Storm Shadow start fighting on this roof, while Billy is in a helicopter that has crashed directly into the building. The impact of this helicopter into the building causes basically everybody to fall off the side, except for Billy, who's kind of just hanging on at the very tail of it. On the way down from the fall, this is pretty fast moving. As they're falling, Storm Shadow enacts something that's called the Arashikage mindset. The Arashikage mindset is sort of I wouldn't say anti-brainwashing, but it's like it focuses a ninja's mindset on a specific goal. Storm Shadow uses the Arashikage mindset to also enter and help Snake Eyes as he's trying to defeat this brainwashing. And it's immediately effective. The Arashikage mindset's very powerful. So they do some ninja moves, and they're able to survive the crash. And then they immediately turn around, and they're like, okay, now we have to go help Billy.
I love that Storm Shadow just kind of throw him over Snake Eyes' shoulder, too.
Yeah, like
just a real sweet little moment there.
Good to have buddies back together.
Yeah, until I'm brainwashed later and we are fighting again.
So they turn back around. They climb right back up at the building, and they are ready to face off with Dr. Venom. Billy is resistant to this, obviously, and they have a bit of a scuffle where he pulls a gun out on him. They shoot Storm Shadow. They're also falling together, and as they're falling, Snake Eyes is able to kind of grab them. They swing into the side of a building. They crash through the glass, and they're having kind of their final showdown. Snake Eyes versus Dr. Venom in Billy's body, which is very short-lived because he basically just chops him on the back of the head, neck, and knocks him out.
It might be Billy's body, but it's still got Dr. Venom's mind.
So while Storm Shadow and Snake Eyes are dragging Billy back to access the brainwave scanner so they can hopefully free him for good, there's a bit of a remaining scuffle as the Rattlers that Cobra had deployed have to face down Sky Striker. Because they had brought in a bunch of bombs to drop, and they couldn't let, if even one of them hit, the backblast would have been tremendous. There's not a lot to say about that because it's so action oriented, other than the Sky Striker is able to successfully gun down all the Rattlers.
Now, is the Sky Striker, like, that's one guy's airplane? Like, that's not, there's not multiple Sky Strikers?
There are multiples. In a general rule, I guess because it's a military force, there are multiples of all of the vehicles.
Okay.
It's just when you bought the Sky Striker, you got Ace, so it's presumed that it's Ace's vehicle.
Yeah, okay.
But in the cartoon, there are many Sky Strikers, and
okay.
for some reason they're all qualified. Duke would fly one, Scarlet would fly one, Snake Eyes would fly one. It didn't matter.
Yeah. Poor Ace.
Yeah.
His only specialty, and he doesn't even get to be that special.
At the culmination of this story arc, Dr. Venom, or Billy, is plugged into the brainwave scanner. The psyche of Billy is kind of batted to the side, and they force Dr. Venom to look into the consequences of his actions, and he is faced down with Quinn, who we mentioned earlier is a mercenary that also died at the same time that Dr. Venom did very early on. And they basically killed each other. And Quinn was even though Quinn was a mercenary, he was like a man of honor. So the spirit of Quinn, or, well, not the spirit, but you know what I'm saying, the avatar of Quinn represents the guilt or all of the victims that Dr. Venom has preyed on over the years, and he takes them away into the recess of the psyche to vanish. And it's at that point that Billy finally awakens. And that brings us to the end of the first trade paperback, the second story arc.
That was real fun.
Yeah.
That was a fun read.
It's a good starting off point for where they were going to go, and it just kind of serves as not only a basic reintroduction, but you can take the lazy way out and just go, it's been 10 years, everybody's fine. Instead, he actually took the time to resolve some stuff that was going on at the end of the last run, and I respect that. I like that.
Yeah, that's a really cool move.
Just by the end of this trade paperback, everybody is not back to normal, but Jet Joes are in operation again. We understand how that happened. The people that are brainwashed are now are free again, and everybody's back on the right team. So I like that. It was a good jumping on point. I think it's a good read for anybody.
Yeah, I definitely think it was really good. I am glad because, you know, they don't have to give you an origin story. Instead, it just kind of keeps it as you know, like a continuation, even though there was such a long gap in the middle. I mean, there were some things that I wish I would have read the original for that I feel like, okay, I probably would have been better set. But I do think it did a good job at least kind of giving you enough that if you really tried, you can understand.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, we will 100% reread that Marvel run. I just wanted to focus on this because I really wanted people that wanted to read G.I. Joe right now would have that stepping stone that they needed to start picking it up right away. And if that's something that you're considering, I 100% recommend it. It's been very good reading lately. There's a lot of stuff that we have to cover on a recap that was completely unexpected. The G.I. Joe universe has changed an awful lot since this reboot in 2010. And I'm looking forward to talking about it. We'll stick with this for a while because, again, I would like to get as caught up with it as possible. But if we start putting out extra content, that's probably the first place we'll start. Is I want you to read that Marvel stuff because there are some of the best G.I. Joe stories ever told exist in that run.
Yeah, I really do want to read more of this. Like, it definitely, like, There's some comic books that I read and I'm like, okay, I'm done. Like I can't. Ooh. It was fun, but I'm glad it's over. There's some that I would pick up and I would read and they were great, but I wouldn't want to do it again. This one is one that I'm like, yeah, let's keep going. I want to see what happens. I want Snake Eyes to be good, and I want to see some Snake Eyes, or not Snake Eyes, sorry, Storm Shadow. I want to see some Storm Shadow Snake Eyes kind of team up action, kicking butts as brother ninjas, you know.
Yeah, there's a lot of also kind of forgotten G.I. Joe stories out there that don't get talked about a whole lot. So as I look at it from a long running standpoint, we'll look into all of those. It will at some point, maybe when the first trade paperback comes out, we'll stop and talk about this Paul Aller run that's also coming out right now, which will be very easy for you to read because it's a complete new continuity. He's introduced a lot of characters.
Nice.
There's a lot of new characters that have come that I am really excited about. That I always get pumped when people start bringing out new characters. So we're going to take a couple of deviations along the road, but ultimately, I want to get through this. Also, when we get through this part of it, we can start to talk about the individual issues as they come out. On our last podcast, I was really pumped because they maybe unintentionally put Zanya in there, and I like talking about little stuff like that as well. That is kind of falls to the wayside, but is uh, is important to me. Is something that I pick up on, and I'm like, oh wow, check this out.
Yeah, and then you'll get to the next issue and they won't say anything about it, and you'll be like, oh, that's cool.
It doesn't matter. She was there. That counts. Okay, I think that's probably it. I think we'll go ahead and wrap it up here. Thanks so much for watching this. Again, we've worked so hard to launch this YouTube channel, and so it means a lot that you not only watched it, but you clearly watched to the end of it. Either that or you skipped to the end. If you've been listening to the podcast, again, we tremendously appreciate it. If you can like and subscribe, smash that like and subscribe button.
Yeah, there
I
you
don't
go.
like.
We're on
I
YouTube
don't.
now.
I feel weird doing the standard YouTube necessity.
Yeah.
But the fact of the matter is that I feel like I'm reading out of a YouTube Necronomicon. But the fact of the matter is we simply want to broaden the reach that the show can access. People that probably don't know what we're doing that might be interested in it or can contribute to it. Then the only way we can do that is if we get more subscribers, if we get more likes, if people share our video, if people review us on iTunes. That's a huge thing. If you can't or don't, I understand. I'm not going to beg for it. but if you like what you saw and you can do it, it means a great deal to us. We appreciate you. Just the fact that you watched it is a huge deal for us. So thank you so much. We'll be back by the end of July for sure. Because we already know what we're doing. It'll be another feature. It's not the same thing as this. We've got a lot of different stuff in the works, and so we're kind of put out a little bit of everything, see what people like, and develop it from there. But it's a character spotlight that I picked and I've been working on for quite a while already.
I'm excited.
And I'm excited to talk about it as well. Oh, one last thing. We forgot to give a review. If you can give this trade paperback review from 1 to 5 stars, Jaren, what would you give it?
I would give it a solid 4.
I think that's pretty fair.
I'd give it a solid 4. It was really good. It was there were a few things that I might have, if it was me, because of course I am an expert at comic books. I would write much better than that, obviously.
Wow.
No.
All right, Chris, get it, Chris Claremont.
No, I mean, don't get me wrong. This is vastly superior to anything I would ever do. But no, I thought it was really good. It was, like I said, it could be a little bit more accessible for new people, which is one of those things that I've talked to you about. Like my biggest thing with G.I. Joe was I didn't know where the heck to jump in and where to start. So that is something that hopefully they start to take into consideration. Hopefully try to start, being a little bit easier.
Yes. I would also give it 4 stars. It was something that I was extremely excited about when it came out in 2010. There's always been these rough patches in the history of G.I. Joe where there's nothing. Where the movie flops and they pull the plug, or when the vintage line dried up, it was there was nothing for several years. So it was exciting to get then. It's exciting to reread now. I hadn't reread these books since 2010. So it was cool to revisit them, see how things have changed based on what's happening in the book right now, and kind of look back and see the roots of that. So yeah, I think 4 stars is fair. I would also give it 4 stars. I liked it a lot. It was good. I like that he resolved all those threads that he left from when the run got canceled, and I look forward to reading the rest of them again also.
Yeah, I can't wait to read another.
Yeah.
I'm down.
So that'll do it for us. One last time, thanks again for tuning in. And we hope to see you next time, where anything's available for discussion and anything Joe's.